Mr. Mayor, we are live.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. I'd like to welcome everybody to the council meeting of November 22nd. We will start with the land acknowledgement. The Township of Oro-Medonte acknowledges that we are situated on the traditional land of the Anishinaabe people and the ancestral territory of the Huron-Wendat. The Anishinaabe include the Odawa, the Ojibwe, and the Potawatomi nations, collectively known as the Three Fires Confederacy. It continues today as the home for diverse Indigenous peoples, including the historic Métis community in Penetangwishing. The Anishinaabe people continue to have an enduring relationship with this land, specifically the Chippewas of Rama First Nations, the Chippewa Tri-Council, and the Williams Treaties First Nations. The Huron-Wendat also continue to pay respect and protect their ancestors and heritage on this land. We honor the Indigenous history and culture that has thrived for millennia in this territory and the treaties that bind us together as partners in the spirit of the shared, sustainable, and prosperous future. We are all treaty people. Our commitment begins with acknowledging the truth so that we can move forward together towards reconciliation. Madam Clerk, may we have a motion to adopt the agenda, please?
Moved by Hutchison, seconded by Shell. Be it resolved that the agenda for the council meeting of Wednesday, November 22nd, 2023 be received and adopted.
Call the vote. All in favor? That is passed. Madam Clerk, may we have a motion for the meeting to go past 4 hours, please, if necessary.
Moved by Young, seconded by Lavoie. Be it resolved that Rule 14.20A, as per the procedural bylaw number 2023-043, be suspended in order to allow the meeting to proceed past the 4-hour adjournment requirement if necessary.
All in favor? That is carried. Is there anyone who wishes to declare a pecuniary interest at this time? Seeing none. Okay, so we have scheduled presentations at 1:30 today with John Ewart, the Integrity Commissioner, and we also have a second timed presentation at 3 p.m. with Inspector Yateman. So Mr. Ewart, if you, and when you are ready, if you can please proceed to the podium and give your presentation, please.
Thank you, Your Worship, and good afternoon to Council and members of staff. Your Worship, I appear this afternoon as Integrity Commissioner for the Corporation, the Township of Oro-Medonte. What I'm presenting to Council this afternoon, Your Worship, and to Council is a report prepared by myself and our office dated November the 14th, 2023. It's not my intention, Your Worship, to go through each and every paragraph in the report. I am working on the assumption that Council has received a copy of the report, and therefore it's not necessary for me to go through line by line examination of the report itself. There are certain areas, though, I do feel it's important that I identify, particularly as it provides background to those who are either watching, listening, and may form the basis of any questions that Council may have arising. So, Worship, to start, it's a report to Council following an inquiry conducted by myself. My authority to do so was under Section 223.4.1 of the Municipal Act 2001 as amended, and it arises from a complaint received that involving a member of Council with alleged contraventions of Section 5.1 of the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act, as well as Sections 4.1 brackets F, 10.1, and 11.2 of the Municipal Code of Conduct for the Township of Oro-Medonte, and that's policy number ADM-24. I think it's important to identify, Your Worship, my authority comes from 223.41 of the Municipal Act. It's clear what the authority I have and the powers set out therein pertain to investigations or inquiries either under the MCIA, Municipal Conflict of Interest Act, or indeed the Municipal Code of Conduct. I think it's important too, Your Worship, to identify that the procedures that one adopts as an IC are mine, subject to only guidance provided, of course, by the courts and again by statute. but the act itself does not direct the procedure or the protocol that I'm to follow. But there are certain key points that I need to identify in my role as Integrity Commissioner for your municipality. Firstly, my role in conducting any inquiry and preparing a report is to act as an impartial third party. I'm unbiased in my review of the facts and in the preparation of any report. Secondly, I have an obligation, in fact, it goes even higher. It's referred to as secrecy to maintain the integrity and confidentiality of the process to the extent possible. In terms of conducting my inquiry, the protocol is to interview the complainant, to interview the respondent, being the member of council, and any primary witnesses that I deem necessary in order to conduct the inquiry, and whether or not their evidence is probative to the result in the report that I prepared. Following that, I collect and review the evidence. I assess the issue of credibility, and I think it's important to point at this point in time, the standard in which I operate is an evidentiary standard, which is to say a balance of probabilities, which is, again, if you want to put into the vernacular, 50-50. That is to say whether or not it's more likely than not that the event occurred. And having done that, I go further to determine whether or not there's any further witnesses required to be interviewed. It's important to note, too, that for the purposes of this inquiry and this investigation, I did not take sworn evidence. I did not feel it was necessary, but the expectation is when responding to any questions posed by an integrity commissioner that one will tell me truthfully the facts that I'm asking or the answers to the questions I'm posing, and that power comes from the Statutory Powers Procedure Act. Once the evidence and the facts are marshaled, it's my responsibility to prepare a final report, and that report is then sent to both the complainant as well as the member of council, setting out my findings and the conclusions with respect to the allegations. Following that, the matter comes back to council for either acceptance of the report, and then furthermore, whether or not the recommendations contained therein will be adopted by council. Your Worship, at this point, I think it's important just to identify the background facts that I've set out in the report. I put forward, as I indicated in the report, much of the language of the complaint without breaching what I consider the confidentiality aspect of it. And as identified, there were two reasons for doing so. Firstly, the background facts were not substantially disputed by the parties, and I came to that conclusion after speaking with both the complainant as well as the respondent and other witnesses that I, in fact, interviewed during this process. Secondly, I thought the facts as identifying them somewhat in a more fulsome manner arising from the complaint would serve to assist the reader in better understanding at the conclusions and the findings that I arrived at. And as council will note, the events which are the subject of this complaint and the subject of this inquiry all stem from an August 29th, 2023 meeting of council, at which point in time, and prior to the commencement, the member of council circulated a document which was in fact a court document in a matter which the municipality was involved in. It was referred to as a factum, and it pertained to a leave to appeal that the municipality, through its solicitors, were seeking for leave to the divisional court. Now, I was careful to put forward in the report that there was perhaps a misunderstanding by the member of council as to what the document constituted. I weighed that in my consideration of this, but whether or not the member understood it to be a decision of the divisional court or another document, particularly the factum, it was not necessarily significant in my findings. The fact of the matter is that the factum was an argument put forward by an opposing party to litigation in which the municipality was involved. So having identified that the document in the envelope that was circulated by the member council contained a factum, and I understand it was also contained the decision of the Ontario Land Tribunal arising from a March 29th decision of the member and written decision of August 24th, 2022. I identified that as well, and I thought in doing so it was fair to the respondent in trying to understand why the document would have been circulated. But in any event, the document was circulated. It was circulated in an anonymous manner, that is, in an unmarked envelope placed at the position of 5 members of council. And in doing so, it was my conclusion and finding that that was done in an attempt to influence either council as a whole or individual members. And I had to identify what the nature of the complaint were. It's twofold, and I've identified that on page 6, Your Worship, and for council, that whether or not the member of council in disseminating a document being the factum in a matter pending before the divisional court was in fact an attempt to influence and solicit council support. And there was a further allegation that the councillor had misrepresented to members what the document was and claiming it to be a decision. In that particular matter, I did not have a finding that there was a breach in that regard. I appreciated that the member was under a misunderstanding as to the nature of the court document, but in any event, it was, that is to say, it was not a decision, but in any event, it was a factum, and a factum, as council's no doubt aware, is a court document which puts forward the other side, if you will, to any dispute pending before the courts. So notwithstanding the fact that there was a misunderstanding as to the nature of the document, I found that of little assistance. Once having reviewed the factum itself, it was a position contrary to counsel. In any event, it dealt with the subject matter, and this is the crux of the issue, Your Worship. It dealt with the subject matter, which was the subject of recusal by the member of council. And it's on that basis, Your Worship, that I did find that there was both a contravention of the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act as well as a breach of the Municipal Code of Conduct. And the analysis that I undertook is set out in the report itself. And coming to the conclusion that there was a breach of the MCIA on the basis that the Act itself specifically says that no attempt should be made to influence any member of council or council once a decision is made. And it was my finding that circulating that document, particularly in the fashion in which it was circulated, was an attempt in some way or other to influence just a matter that was coming before council on the issue of short-term rentals on a closed agenda. So on that basis, I did find there was a breach of the MCIA. Turning to the Municipal Code of Conduct, there was, as indicated, a concurrent complaint involving the Municipal Code of Conduct, and specifically Section 11.2. And 11.2, it's worth citing, Your Worship, in the sense that it says a member shall also avoid any conflict of interest that is a non-pecuniary interest in order to maintain public confidence in the township and its local boards. And if a member has a non-pecuniary interest, the member should declare the non-pecuniary interest and then leave the meeting. And under no circumstances shall the member participate in discussions or vote on the matter or attempt to influence the voting on the matter in any way before, during, or after the meeting. And I think of significance there, Your Worship, is the statement under any circumstances. And upon my review of this matter, Your Worship, I did in fact find that the dissemination, the distribution of that court document was contrary to the conflict of interest as prohibited in Section 11.2 of the Municipal Code of Conduct. Turning, Your Worship, to the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act, it's important to identify that once a breach has been identified based on my findings, I'm charged with the responsibility of deciding whether or not it is of such an egregious nature that it warrants the court intervention. And the court intervention provided for by MCIA is a court sanction that could be awarded against or as against the member of council for a breach of the MCIA. And even though I did find that there was a breach of the MCIA, specifically Section 5.1, which 5.1c states that no member having declared a conflict of interest in a pecuniary matter shall attempt in any way, whether before, during, or after the meeting, to influence the voting on any such question. Perhaps it was remiss in identifying, it's set out in the report that the member of council had declared a conflict of interest on several occasions prior based on a pecuniary interest in short-term rentals or bed and breakfast, and therefore on the August 29th was operating under past recusals, if not a current recusal of that day. And the basis of that finding is set out on page 11. I'm going to just go through them very briefly, Your Worship. The member, as I indicated, had recused himself from participation in deliberations on voting on matters resolving or involving short-term rentals, and such recusals are matters of public records. Secondly, the member had declared a conflict of interest on August 29th, 2023. That is the day on which the events are the subject of the complaint. The council meeting agenda for the Township of Oro-Medonte did identify a closed meeting item. It was put forward as solicitor-client privilege, written correspondence, litigation affecting the municipality, and in brackets identified clearly short-term rentals. And as I indicated in the background facts, prior to the commencement of the council meeting on August 29, 2023, the facts which are not disputed, the member did provide copies of a factum of a party in opposition to the township's position involving short-term rentals to 5 members of council in an anonymous fashion. I indicated, and I think in fairness to the member, that he claims to have misunderstood the nature of the document, which was provided to the 5 members of council, believing it to be a decision of the divisional court, a matter which had already been resolved in his understanding. And lastly, that the member was of the opinion, having come into possession of the document, it was his understanding that the member believed it should be brought to the attention of council. And putting forward those facts, Your Worship, I think that's a fair representation of what the evidence was on behalf of the respondents. When I did identify the background facts, I tried to indicate where the evidence lined up and where there was any discrepancy or contradiction of the evidence, to be fair to all parties involved. In any event, having arrived at the position that there was a breach of MCIA, it is not my recommendation, Your Worship, that any court proceedings commence involving this member of council to the courts to seek a court sanction. And in doing so, I've set out the reasons. Obviously, the first and foremost, which is not in and of itself a governing factor, but the cost incurred in commencing an application to the court is something that, as an IC, I have to be very, very cognizant of. And moreover, the courts have provided direction on that. I did not think that, in my opinion, in my decision, that any penalty or sanction to be imposed by a single judge of the Superior Court of Justice was justified. And I've set those reasons out on page 13, and they are as follows. 1, the seriousness of the contravention of the MCIA. 2, whether there had been any enduring benefit as a result of the contravention. And thirdly, whether it was appropriate to seek any or all the following sanctions, i.e. removal from office, disqualification from holding of office, or, if necessary, a disgorgement of profits. In my opinion, Your Worship, even though there was a breach and a finding, I did not feel that it warranted the application to the Superior Court in order to sanction the member in this regard. However, having found that there was a breach of the Municipal Code of Conduct, and having been the member subject to a concurrent complaint, I did rely upon the provisions of the Township's Code of Conduct to recommend a sanction involving this member's actions of August 29, 2023, and in particular the contravention of Section 11.2 of the Municipal Code of Conduct. And in doing so, the recommendations are put forward to council in my report, and that's pursuant to subsection 223.4 of the Municipal Act 2001. Your Worship, the recommendations are in fact set out in my conclusion, and I will just read them for the record. Firstly, that council impose the following sanctions arising from the findings set out in this report. A, that the member of council is subject to a reprimand. B, that council direct the treasurer to suspend for 60 days of the compensation paid to the member for services as a member of council, commencing with the next pay period following the passing of any resolution. Secondly, that the member be provided with a copy of this report, and that the member review the Code of Conduct and the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act in light of the findings contained in my report. Finally, Your Worship, it's important to identify that Section 223.6 brackets 2 of the Act allows me and states that I'm to disclose in the report any and all matters that I think are necessary for the purpose of the report. It is my opinion, Your Worship, that I've done that, and my report reflects that. Your Worship, subject to any questions that you or council may have, that is the report presented to council in this matter.
Thank you, Mr. Ewart. And if an oversight by me of welcoming you to our chamber earlier, I apologize, but welcome. And thank you very much for an excellent report, well laid out and detailed. I will open the floor at this time to members of council if they have any questions they'd like to direct to Mr. Ewart for clarity or better understanding of the matter before us. Councillor Young.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Mr. Ewart, I just see your recommendations for punishment there, the 60 days. And I'm curious, how did you come up with that? I mean, is it a comparative thing to other investigations you've conducted and recommendations for penalty? I know that you, I believe you're still the IC for 37 some municipalities. So was it a comparative thing? I mean, that given the offense or the breaches of code here in the Municipal Act, you felt that was appropriate? Is that? But I want to know where you came up with that 60 days, okay? Thank you.
Thank you, Worship, through you. Yeah, Councillor Young, the range, I think it's important perhaps to identify, the range of sanction in terms of a suspension of pay ranges up to 90 days. And when I look at the contravention in this particular case, we were dealing with both an MCIA breach, which I did find, as well as that of the Code of Conduct. I thought it was appropriate at 60 days based on the finding that there was an MCIA breach, as well as the breach of the Code of Conduct, particularly Section 11.2. And when I look at these sanctions, and I'll be candid with you, I struggle with these every time. This is perhaps the hardest part of the job in terms of saying, well, what is appropriate? But as I indicated in the report, Your Worship, a clear message has to be sent. And in doing so, I chose 60 days in terms of saying it's not that it's a midpoint, but rather I think it suggests, it conveys the severity of what conflict of interest is in dealing with matters like this. And again, I don't necessarily compare them to others I've done. I've done many reports and I've delivered many reports, but each one is separate. And I purposely try to avoid saying I did this here, so therefore that. Simply put, Your Worship, there's no cookie cut formula for this. Each one has to be assessed. And I can say candid with you, I struggle with this every time. It is perhaps the hardest part. Because I have the greatest appreciation for those who serve on council. At the same time, there's overarching governance that needs to be recognized, and conflict of interest being the most severe. So how I arrived at that number, I thought it was fair, given the fact that there was a finding of the MCIA, a contravention thereof, and secondly, the breach of the Code of Conduct itself was significant. And I think thirdly, there had been past recusals, so there had to have been some understanding as to what a pecuniary interest was. So with the greatest respect to the member, I thought 60 days was most appropriate.
Thank you for that explanation. Thank
you. Any other questions at this time? I do have a question I'd like to ask you, Mr. Ewart. You make reference to a concurrent complaint in the report. Is that concurrent complaint of the same matter and issue, or is it of another matter or issue?
Thank you, Worship. It's the same facts and circumstances. In fact, I identify in the report itself that your Code of Conduct, carefully crafted, I would say, specifically recognizes that I'm not to rely on evidence or facts in an MCIA to support a Code of Conduct complaint, but there's no prohibition for me to look at the same facts and circumstances. So the concurrent complaint under the Code of Conduct was in hand with the MCI complaint, and I did look at each section individually and separately in arriving at my conclusion. And as the report indicates, I did not find in all cases of the allegations of the contravention of the Code of Conduct, but they do arise, Your Worship, from the same set of facts and circumstances. That's the August 29, 2023 meeting of Council.
Okay, thank you very much. And just another follow-up question is, you make reference that the documentation was done through a simple Google search, and I tried to find that document or factums of the court, and I may be computer illiterate, but I'm just wondering, is is it an easily accessible document to obtain a factum from a Google search on the internet?
Your worship, it is if you have the right software. Our office uses various search programs, policies. I have no idea what programs or software the complainant possessed. I did ask this question specifically because that's where this was an area where the evidence contradicted itself, and I wanted to be fair to both the complainant as well as the respondent, your worship. So I identified both. The response put forward by the member was through searches conducted of the internet, this document, i.e. the factum, was discovered. That I heard a different version in that it was perhaps provided, and I've identified this in a report provided by residents perhaps. I have to take the evidence at face, and again, in an attempt to be absolutely unbiased and fair to the evidence received, I identified those areas where the evidence lined up and where the evidence did not line up. But to answer your question directly, your worship, is it easy? It would be easy for me. I don't know about the member.
Yeah. No, thank you. Okay, so that's it for my questions. Does anyone else have any questions or comments at this time that they'd like to make? None? So, Madam Clerk, may we have the motion?
Oops. Just a moment. Mr. Mayor, I will need a mover and a seconder to receive.
To receive. Can I have a mover? Deputy Mayor Lavoie, seconded by Councillor Young.
Moved by Lavoie, seconded by Young. Be it resolved that the report dated November 14th, 2023, from John Heward O'Dwyer, Integrity Commissioner, rewritten report, be received.
So just so we're clear for the public, and we're receiving it and passing the recommended.
We're receiving the report. If council would like to determine to accept the sanctions or otherwise, that is, you may put that on the floor.
Okay. And are we going to pass this all under one motion to fill in?
We can amend the motion, but right now it's just the motion to receive. Would council like to, Mr. Mayor, would you like me to read the option to accept the sanctions or
I would
otherwise?
say we like the process, and I apologize, Mr. Ewart, because different integrity commissioners use different processes. Because we don't identify, and I think so the public understands, because we don't identify under this process the member, there is no comment necessary through the process. Am I fair and correct in stating that?
You are, your worship. So what's transpired to date is the receiving of the report, which I understand is subject of the motion, and council is at liberty to go further to accept the recommendations contained therein. And as Ms. Aubuchon's identified, that can be all part of one motion, sir.
So I guess I'm asking council, do you want to deliberate this, or do you want to discuss it, or are you fine with the recommendations as they have been presented? Deputy Mayor Lavoie?
Yes, I'm fine with the recommendations as they've been presented.
So if you can read the motion with the sanctions, the reprimand in, and what's been recommended is as approving, and the council will vote on that, please.
Okay. Moved by Lavoie, seconded by Young. Be it resolved that the report dated November 14th, 2023, from John Heward O'Dwyer, Integrity Commissioner, rewritten report, be received and adopted. that council supports the sanctions outlined in the Integrity Commissioner's report as follows. That a reprimand, and that the treasurer be directed to suspend pay for 60 days of compensation pay for the member of council, commencing with the next pay period following the passing of this resolution.
Thank you. I'll call the vote. All in favor? And that is carried. So thank you, Mr. Ewart. I appreciate you making your trip up here today, and safe travels back to beautiful Peterborough. And you know, like I said, it's nice to see you. And next time, hopefully it's under more pleasant circumstances.
Thank you, Worship, but I appreciate the opportunity of appearing before council on this very important task. Thank you, sir, and thank you, council.
Thank you. Okay, so we'll continue to move on. Item 4 is closed session items. We have no closed session items today. Section 5, minutes of councils. May we have a motion for the 2 sets of minutes, Madam Clerk?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, if I could just have a moment. Moved by Clark, seconded by Young. Be it resolved that the draft minutes of the council meeting held on Wednesday, November 8th, 2023 be received and adopted as printed and circulated, and that the draft minutes of the Joint Accessibility Advisory Committee held on October the 19th, 2023 be received.
Any questions, comments, amendments? Seeing none, I will call the vote. All in favor? And that is carried. We have no recognitions of achievements this week. Public meetings, we have none. Deputations. Well, it's 3 o'clock, so we'll skip on to 9. Is there any items on the agenda of members that are in the chamber that wish to be moved forward, or is everyone that because of having to leave early? Seeing none. Open forum. Madam Clerk, has there been anyone who's been registered for open forum?
No, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Is there anyone in chambers who wishes to speak of any item on the agenda? Seeing none. Reports of municipal officers. Mr. Benz, would you like to provide a summary and comments on your report regarding community services and Boots and Hearts' event this past year, please?
Mayor Greenlaw, wondering if we could maybe advance one of the other reports. I'd like to tie this one into Inspector Yateman's presentation, which is scheduled
Okay, that's fine.
for 3
We can
o'clock.
do that. So do you want to move to 11B? Carla, would she be ready? Is that what we'd like to do, Sean?
We can do that, Your Worship, yes.
Okay. Okay, so may we have the motion for 11B, Madam Clerk?
Moved by Clark, seconded by Bard. Be it resolved that OCS 2023-19, Carla Musso Garcia, Manager of Operations, Pride asphalt markings, be received and adopted. That council approve the installation of Pride markings at a location listed below to be selected by council. 2A, Line 4, Highland Drive, pedestrian crosswalk. 2B, Township of Oro-Medonte Administration Center entrance feature. 2C, Oro-Medonte Community Arena entrance feature / ice inlay. And that additional allocation of $6,000 for materials to complete the installation be incurred in the 2024 Operations and Community Services budget.
Okay, thank you, Madam Clerk. Carla, would you like to speak to this, or do you want us just to open the floor for discussions?
Mayor Greenlaw, maybe I'll just do a quick introduction. So following the request from council, we have had a look at a number of options that are available. As Carla's identified in her report, looking at locations that are high visibility locations and prominent. There are a number of operational constraints as well. So looking at just how we optimize the life cycle. So we did look at the one crosswalk that we have at line 4 at Highland Drive, as well as the Oro-Medonte Community Arena and the Admin Center here. And there are, at the arena, we are looking to repave the parking lot there. So it wouldn't, I think from a staff perspective, make sense to do something short term until the paving is complete, because we'd have to redo it. And then just another consideration around the potential of an inlay in our ice surface at the arena, which would have to be again next season, as the ice is already in. So that's really kind of an overview of the report. There is a minor financial impact. We're not sure what the life cycle would be, but all of those locations do kind of have the visibility, the prominence, and also allow for any celebrations that are to take place. I think from a staff perspective, the preferred option that we would lay out would be the administration center here, just because we've got the flags and we've had a number of celebrations here, and it would just further complement that. But there are a number of alternatives there for council's consideration.
Thank you very much, Mr. Binns. Okay, so council, I'll now open it up for discussion. Does anyone want to start? Councillor Hutchison?
I didn't even put my card up. You read my mind.
I had the vibe.
First of all, thanks so much for the report. This is important to me and to the community, and I appreciate the work that's gone into the recommendations on the locations. So through you, Mayor Greenlaw, to Mr. Binns, when are you scheduling the paving at the arena?
Through you, Mayor Greenlaw, to Councillor Hutchison, we're looking at 2025. We are going through the recalibration process now too, so it can't make a firm commitment that that's what that'll look like, but it'd be 2025 or 2026.
Supplementary. So my thoughts are this, and I'll just share it with the rest of council. I think all 3 locations are a good choice, but if it were to come to me, my one thought would be to see it at line 4 and Highland Drive. The new school and community center will be located there, so it will be a high traffic area. I know the arena would probably have the equal amount of traffic, but my reason for asking the question about the repaving is I would include the caveat that perhaps if we do choose line 4 and Highland, that we wait until the time that the school is in place and put the marking on the road at that time, because there will be a lot of construction material going back and forth, and would probably be pretty rough on anything that was installed prior. So that's just my 2 cents, and I'll leave it over to the rest of council to discuss. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Hutchins. I concur with if that is likely the best spot for it, and I agree with your comment of let's wait until the construction's done so it doesn't get kind of worn down and not last the 5 year to 6 years they expect. Councillor Schell.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Greenlaw. Through you to Sean. Am I to understand, Sean, that there's only going to be one choice, or all 3?
Through you, Mayor Greenlaw, to Councillor Schell, we've outlined a number of options. There is a cost that's involved in it, so I think like the staff recommendation would be one location. It's not to say that you can't expand from that, but we have just outlined a number of considerations for council, so it's really at council's discretion, but there is a cost involved.
Supplementary?
Yes, thank you. On that note, then, have you looked at or thought of how it would take place at the arena or at the township office here normally they're looked at as to being a crosswalk. So I agree with Councillor Hutchinson for a crosswalk, but I can't vision how it would look in another location.
Through you, Mayor, to Councillor Schell, the locations that were selected here at the Administration Centre and at the arena would be looked at, specifically at the arena would be a pedestrian crossover from the parking lot through to the entrance of the facility. As part of the parking lot redesign, it would include a pedestrian area to provide protection for people coming in and out of the arena. At the Administration Centre, the asphalt, the parking lot is not subject to that type of installation. There is an area at the apron of the driveway that would be installed throughout that area that has adequate asphalt for that thermoplastic to be placed on there.
Thank you.
Thank you. No, I think, when Councillor Hutchison brought this forward a month ago or two, the purpose is to align with other municipalities. It is a crosswalk, so it has a functional purpose behind it. So I think I agree with that location, and I applaud for the forethought of thinking about, let's do it when the school's there and opening up, and I think that would be great. It'd be great to get it up somewhere tomorrow. The other thing I want to make sure that the public understands is, although we had other places where we have schools, it's also about practicality with sidewalks that they can come off, going on and off to. And also the fact that a lot of the schools are located where they're on a county or a provincial roadway, which we don't really have the right to do that and maintain it. So, Councillor Bard.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Greenlaw, to the floor. I'm getting the sense that maybe we're pushing this back a couple of years to accommodate possibly the resurfacing or the new school. I would just like to maybe think that during this time that we reach out to the communities involved and see if maybe we initiate something different. So maybe a floor mat or something in the entrance to our buildings that has the flag and within it, and speak with the communities involved, and maybe we don't do a crosswalk. Maybe we start a new initiative in Oro-Medonte that would be maybe not necessarily cheaper, but we could put it in more locations and serve a similar purpose to educate people and ally with our communities.
Good point. Thank you. Any other comments at this time? Councillor Young.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I like the idea of the administration office only because it sends a stronger message, I think, that the administration of Oro-Medonte is behind this, people coming here. And I'm sort of considered what has been said earlier in front of the arena there, or at the arena. It likely gets more traffic there going into that place, but I think that eliminating them, I think the administration office is probably the place it should be.
Thank you. Any further comments? So I think what we need to do is we need to make a decision. I appreciate the other options that we're looking at as doing, whether it's entrance mats or in other locations, but I think, we can consider those things and have discussions and look at that over the next year. But I think what we're looking for is a decision today as to what was brought forward by Councillor Hutchison, and it was for a rainbow crosswalk. And I think, personally, I just think the best place for what the request was for is line 4. And, it will take a little longer before we actually implement it once the construction's done. But in the meantime, it doesn't mean that we can't look into other things that we can do to promote the pride flag within the townships. So does anyone want to bring forward of the options that we'll put forward to choose from? How do you want the motion to be? decision today would be nice if anyone wants to take the initiative. Councillor Hutchison?
I would like to put forward a motion to approve the installation of a Pride crosswalk at Highland Drive and the fourth line at the time the school is completed.
Okay. Okay, and Deputy Mayor Laval will second that?
He will.
Okay. You know, even though we're voting on this one item now, it doesn't mean that we can't stop looking at other components that we could implement moving forward over the time as well. So.
Okay.
Okay. So, Madam Clerk, when you have the motion ready, if you would like to read it, please.
Okay. Moved by Clark, seconded by Bard. Be it resolved that OCS 2023-19, Carla Musso Garcia, Manager Operations, Pride asphalt markings be received and adopted. That Council approve the installation of Pride markings at a location listed as Line 4, Highland Drive, pedestrian crosswalk, and that the additional allocation of $6,000 for materials to complete the installation be included in the 24-25 Operations and Community Services budget, that staff be further directed to await the completion of construction of the new school and community centre at Line 4, Highland Drive, pedestrian walkway.
Okay. Any comments or concerns regarding the motion? Seeing none, I'll call the vote. All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Okay, so Mr. Binns, would you like to, can we move to item 11C now? Would we have enough time to cover that off before the 3 o'clock? Or do you want?
I believe so, Mayor Greenlaw.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, then please, whenever you're ready, you can begin, please.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Greenlaw, to council and the community. What we've tried to do in this report, you'll recall several months ago, we completed our 10-year Parks and Recreation Master Plan. One of the items that we wanted to do a thorough review of is our recreation facilities and future directions as it relates to our community halls. Community halls are relatively old facilities in the municipality, ranging from 68 to 115 years old. You can see in the background of the report, there's been a number of reports that have come before council and a number of challenges, I think, faced by the community halls and the boards of management over the years, things like changing building codes, accessibility, new water regulations. The majority of those challenges have been around funding some of those costs and the state of repair of those facilities. We do have an existing policy that any capital projects are to be on a 50-50 cost share basis. It is a bit of an antiquated policy that it hasn't necessarily been followed over that time because the costs are just simply out of reach for the hall boards to raise their 50% of the share of the capital requirements. And as a result of that, some of the buildings have fallen into a state of repair just simply because it didn't get done at the right time because they didn't have their 50% contribution. So what the master plan lays out is that the community halls are valued by the community. There was an extensive consultation process, and our communities do value our community halls. They are older buildings, and they are symbols of the little hamlets, many of them being former community type uses and or one-room schoolhouses. So what we've tried to do in the report is lay out a couple of issues with respect to the current state and some recommended directions for policy amendment. The first part has to do with community usage, and we use the notion of for community by community when we're talking about the community halls, because it's really kind of the intent of the community hall model. And for it to work, there needs to be community involvement in the boards of management that operate those halls, and there needs to be community use of those halls. So that's really kind of, what the direction from the master plan is, looking for the communities to be more engaged in being involved as volunteers on the boards and programming the halls. In many cases, we've created a bit of a cycle where the only activity that's happening in the halls are fundraising activities to pay for the utilities, and you kind of have to question what the overall public benefit is to those things. Sure, it brings people together, but they're not really being used for what the needs of the community are, like meeting spaces for community groups, getting people together to play cards, those kinds of things. So that's kind of one of the fundamental directional shifts being recommended from the master plan. And really, I think what the baseline of success is if the community is involved and the community is using the halls, then the halls will be a success. But there's been varying degrees of that over the years. The halls are in generally good condition. We've invested quite a bit of money into the halls over the years, as have the hall boards, to deal with some significant life safety retrofits in 2019. There was a roof that was just recently completed at Carly Hall. So there aren't any kind of major significant expenditures that we anticipate in the next kind of 3-year horizon as it relates to the community halls. But as you heard during the master plan process, there is some limitations with physical accessibility in our requirements as a public entity to have buildings that are accessible to all of the community, and a number of limitations to even make the halls physically accessible. In many cases, it's just not possible without significantly altering the character of those buildings. So that's certainly something, again, down the road that we'll need to look at how we deal with that. I'll also say that the master plan does recommend that we move towards more modern facilities that provide a greater degree of different types of public use, and we're certainly doing that with the school and community center, and there are recommendations for that to serve the northern portions of the community up around the Moonstone Way as well. Part of that direction back in 2019 was that because of the costs associated with Edgar Hall and the limited use, there was direction from council to pursue a lease agreement with Edgar Hall to complete that work. We did outline that specific direction in the report. The Edgar Hall has completed all of that, all of the required life safety work in 2019 with donations in kind from the community. They're requesting council's consideration to be considered the same as the rest of the halls, and not to pursue a lease agreement. And that's certainly something that that staff are supportive of, because the barrier that existed before was the level of investment required to deal with those life safety upgrades. The other recommended direction is really to look at the community halls no different than we would look at any other program or service provided by the municipality, and look at the merits of the capital investment, the operating costs from a cost benefit perspective. And looking to structure a business planning process with the hall boards where they would outline what they're able to contribute to capital and work with our team to lay out the multi-year capital plan, how much they can feasibly fundraise for, and how they're going to program and animate the halls, getting back to that notion of being run by the community for the community. We'd recommend that we develop that template over 2024 and look to implement that as part of the 2025-2026 budget deliberations. And part of that would also include, sound financial planning, that if we know that there's a roof that needs to be completed, then there's revenue that gets put into a reserve to be able to deal with the replacement of those major components of the building as it moves forward. The other potential structural change that we've had some discussion with the hall boards about is looking at the model of leasing the hall to a community hall board. There's a number of caveats that would be required to accommodate that. One, the hall boards would need to become registered as not-for-profits. It would put an additional burden on the hall boards for acquiring directors and officers insurance and their own operating insurance. But there's a number of benefits there for the hall boards as well, that they wouldn't be subject to the same kind of requirements that the township would have. And really, I mean, they would be able to operate the hall a little bit more, or with a little bit more autonomy than under kind of the auspice of the township, and really be for the community, by the community. I don't think there's an awful lot of interest from the hall boards at this point in time in pursuing that option, but we did want to outline that. And it may be something that the hall boards may be interested in pursuing at a later date, certainly in discussions with Hawkstone, that has quite a bit of use and community involvement down there. It's something that they've contemplated, but it is a relatively new board, and they're still in the process of kind of getting things re-engaged in that community. The other thing that we need to address from a policy perspective is our municipal alcohol policy. So we do have a policy that governs how and when events with alcohol can be held in municipal facilities. It's really intended to promote responsible consumption and reduce our exposure to risk and as such liability. Over the years, the municipality or municipalities in general have been subject to more and more litigation. Our alcohol policy does currently permit licensed alcohol functions with an SOP or an appropriate license at our community halls. The issue is we lack the control that's required to ensure compliance with those specific guidelines under the policy. So while there is some deferral of risk through an insurance requirement, we have no staff in those facilities. Our volunteers aren't in the facilities, and often the events go till last call, which might be 1:45 or the early hours. So there's a risk of damage to facilities, and there's a risk to the township in general in terms of host alcohol liquor liability. So we have had discussions with our insurer, and it has been a topic of discussion with our community hall boards for probably the last 5+ years. There's not a lot of events that take place at the halls that are licensed events. The hall boards have really discouraged them over the years because of just some of the problems that exist. So we are recommending that we do formally discontinue that process and amend the policy. There are still a number of facilities across the township that are staffed that do provide that ability, including the Oro-Medonte Community Arena. The other policy direction that we need some direction on is relating to the Brookstone Academy. And the Brookstone Academy is a not-for-profit private school that started I think as a result of some of the shutdowns that were happening over COVID, all of our community halls were closed. They started at Carly, and it was a good interim use of the facility. It's morphed over that time to be both at Carly and in Edie Hall, and more recently just at Edie Hall. And what we're finding now with the facilities opening up post-COVID is that there is a conflict in kind of that dedicated school use and the use of the community. So we have outlined a number of options. Our recommended direction is, again, falling back on the premise of being for the community by the community. We don't believe that, although there is a benefit of having a private, not-for-profit school, it's really not core to what we do in that mandate of being for the community, by the community, and community use. I think the preference of the Edie Hall Board is to look at an exclusive or semi-exclusive lease agreement with Brookstone Academy, but we are recommending that rental agreement be terminated at the end of this school year to facilitate full community access, again with that purpose in mind. And I will say that all of these directions and recommendations coming out of this report have all we've consulted with Brookstone, we've consulted with the hall boards, and as we've mentioned, as it relates to the municipal alcohol policy, we've consulted with our insurer. So at a really high level, those are kind of the recommended directions for policy amendment. I think I'd conclude in coming back to the for community by community piece, and really looking at the intent of the community halls, that they do serve a purpose, and a purpose hopefully in the future being able to serve some of the grassroots community needs, even with a model of more modern facilities coming down the pipeline. But it also puts the accountability, I think, into the communities to use and activate those spaces. And the master plan does provide direction on options that are there for if the halls aren't being utilized, or we do need to make some of those tough decisions down the road around how we handle that. And I think it puts the accountability on our communities and the hall boards to do that through the annual business planning process. And we had a meeting last week with the hall boards, and I think the hall boards are all in concurrence with kind of the recommended direction. And it will be a challenge. The hall boards and halls have been run by volunteers for a long time, and we have challenges in recruiting and retaining volunteers, and those volunteers programming the spaces. So it won't be an easy task, but certainly I think if the communities continue to have an interest in the halls, they'll make it work, as they have in the case at Hawkstone Hall, that we were facing a tough decision there, and the community rallied together, and it's amazing to see all the stuff that's happening down at Hawkstone. So that's really an overview of the report, and its overarching kind of recommended changes to policy direction. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Binns. Yeah, no, I agree. Like, I'd give full kudos to the new members that have come together for the Hawkstone board. They've done an amazing job, and it's unfortunate sometimes it has to get to that point where you're on the verge of shutting something down before the community rallies. And I think the important thing about community halls is they need to be more. They need to be, as you said, about the community. Not that they're there constantly trying to do fundraisers to pay the bills, because that's really not what a community hall is about. So kind of a lot here to digest. Very important issue, very important to a lot of communities in this township. So I'm going to open the floor at this time for discussion and comments or questions to Mr. Binns. Took you a while to struggle with that, but would you like to make a comment, Deputy Mayor?
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Mr. Binns. Would Edie be self-sufficient without the school lease?
Through you, Mayor Greenlaw, it's a good question. I think, quite frankly, Edie Hall, Edie and Edgar were recommended back in 2010 as facilities that we should consider divesting of. And that was simply just due to limited community utilization. I think they both, Edgar probably has a more prominent location, but Edie is definitely a little more remote. They also had the Village Players there for a number of years, and like many community organizations, they kind of felt the toll of COVID being shut down, and they've been struggling and aren't operating out of the hall any longer. So it's hard to say. I think maybe that's part of it with the hall boards, is that it might be a little bit easier to try and get a tenant in and pay the bills while they try and figure it out. But I don't know. I think it would be a substantial challenge for them to overcome. But that being said, I think the ball's in their court to put that plan together, and certainly our staff have been working with the board to try and get new volunteers and to help them program the space. But the location is a challenge for sure. The number of volunteers are a challenge, and past utilization has been a challenge.
Supplemental?
Yes, I mean, I'm relatively new to the community, so I want to guard my comments in this regard, but it does seem as if the halls are perpetually on the precipice, and either there needs to be some methodology whereby the community accepts them, or the township accepts the ongoing rescue, as I see it. Anyway, and I'm not certain what the costs would reflect. I think the number was $10,000 per hall or something like that. I don't find that an overly offensive amount of money when set against our budget. So, that's where I struggle with it. And I guess the other, do we have any sense, and this will be the final question, I'll wrap it up, Mr. Mayor. Do we have any sense of what it would take to make these accessible? I know you're saying it sounds like quite a bit, and maybe one or two aren't capable of being made accessible. I don't know. So maybe some kind of forecasting on that basis might help, but I don't want to be just suggesting we kick the can down the road forever. So any comment on that? Thank you very much.
Through you, Mayor Greenlaw, to Deputy Mayor Lavoie. I think we certainly echo the comments in terms of like the cost, the operating cost, and there isn't any substantial capital requirement in the foreseeable future. But the issue, I think, is really the feasibility of accessibility, and for anybody who's been into the community halls, it's just not a matter of putting a ramp in, because there's stairs that goes to a plateau and then up to the upper level, and the washrooms in many cases are not accessible, and you'd have to totally reconfigure the hall, which is a small building to begin with. So the order of magnitude costs associated with that just creep up, and then in doing that, you create a number of limitations with the functionality of the hall at the same time. So I think from a feasibility perspective, it's something that just realistically probably isn't feasible, because you're talking about having to put elevating devices into the halls. And I mean, you think about that in that type of building. And I mean, I think it's a challenge for all these older buildings. Churches and other public buildings are in the same requirement. And that's probably why the building code hasn't been amended to be prescriptive in requiring retrofits, that they continue to kind of push that deadline down the road. But as we've articulated in the report, as a public entity, we have an onus to provide accessible facilities, and unfortunately, as a result of some of those changes, things like elections and some of those things that used to happen in the community facilities, even public meetings, we're not able to do now because there's a legislative requirement to have them physically accessible. So I think it's not just a matter of cost, it's a matter of overall feasibility. Hawkstone may be a little bit easier, and again, it's in a settlement area, and we have to look at utilization and those kinds of things. But I would say the rest of the halls, it's a significant barrier that just wouldn't be feasible when we're required to do that.
Thank you very much.
Okay, just one quick comment, then I'm going to go to Councillor Schell, then Councillor Young. But Mr. Binns, if Edie was to lease the building from the township, and then they would have the autonomy to model whatever they want with a tenant, is that correct, or would they not be allowed to do that? Yeah.
I think Mayor Greenlaw, we'd have to look at the overall benefit, right? And I think we would recommend a lease in a case like Hawkstone that has a strong board, that has a lot of activity, that has a business plan on what that looks like. I think all of those things would be kind of requirements before moving into that lease direction. And that's something that was in place with the Edgar Hall. There were a number of kind of prescribed requirements, including a business case. So I think it would be, I mentioned some of the challenges that exist with Edie. I think from our perspective, however we were to structure an arrangement, we would want to try and set them up for success. And I think there's a number of challenges as it is now with the support of the municipality. I don't think that, that'd be a feasible option. I think there'd be a number of challenges there for them to be able to do that. I did mention the costs of insurance for the directors, and there's an additional burden for reporting as a not-for-profit. There's all of those kinds of things, and when they already lack volunteers, it becomes an even greater challenge.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Schell.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Greenwell. Through you to Sean and or the floor. We're looking at money to help support these halls. I'm wondering if it somehow down the road, if we ever get our mat tax implemented. I know the mat tax is required to be spent on tourism. But when you take a look at all the halls, when there's an event going on, people are coming in from outside of the area to go to those events that maybe could be utilized as a reason for having a tourism mat tax applied to them. Just a thought.
Yeah, I think, and Mr. Binns, correct me if I'm wrong, I think 2% of the 4% could go to the halls, but the other 2% is to market tourism within the township. But no, a good idea, and that's something that would be considered if we implement a mat tax, which is not happening in the immediate future because we're still trying to have a report come back on that. But no, definitely it would be something we could consider. Councillor Young?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor, to Mr. Binns. Sean, who's responsible for financially responsible for installing making them accommodations so people can get in out of there? And depending on cost, would that result in the shutting down of any community hall? Is it too early to say that? And thirdly, I'll get back to you in a minute, as soon as I remember what the third thing was.
Through you, Mayor Greenlaw, to Councillor Young, I think the responsibility would, if you're talking about physical accessibility and accommodations and some of the capital work that would be required, I think we come back to what I just said is, you know, in terms of the overall feasibility, I think it would be part of that business planning process. You know, is it even feasible? The starting point, and as I said, in many cases, I don't think it would be. But any capital works would be part of the annual business plan requirement, and it may be 50-50 for some halls. It may not be 50-50. I think we need to look at it from a cost benefit perspective, recognizing that they're all different. They're going to have different degrees of utilization, and some of the halls may serve a different purpose. And Curly Hall, for example, is I think a good. It's a little bit different than the rest of the community halls because it is a one-room schoolhouse. It's got those heritage attributes that some of the other halls don't have, and you know, it may be something that through our heritage committee and council, there's a direction to preserve that. And that, you know, there's a benefit that may not exist somewhere else. So I think there's it comes back to that business planning process, and then looking at cost benefit across all of the halls and the other programs and services that are provided.
Supplemental?
Yeah, just a question.
Or number 3? Do you have number 3?
Actually,
yet?
it's number 3 and 4. Sean, over what period of time does this have to be in place, and can the making them accessible, can that be phased in over a period of time, cost-wise? I'm thinking budgeted for different years.
It could be. Again, I come back to the feasibility, and I'll maybe just say that part of the facility provision model that's outlined in the master plan recognizes these challenges, and that's part of this shift to more modern facilities, so that, you know, trying to retrofit facilities is not an easy task, and, you know, doing something that's purpose built, recognizing, you know, the needs of the community have changed, and we are looking at those kind of more modern facilities, and looking at some point, you know, having to make decisions as it relates to what the future of these halls are. And it's not to say that, you know, we're closing or recommending closing of halls to build more modern facilities, because they do have value, but the value is in serving a different kind of community activity. It's, you know, the bridge games, the euchre games, you know, those kinds of things that don't happen in kind of more modern community centers, but that's all predicated on the community using them and being involved in them. So the accessibility piece, we don't know what that looks like. We do, as I said, there's feasibility limitations. We haven't put forward, you know, putting elevators into the community halls, just simply from our perspective. You know, if we're looking to do that, you're better to knock it down and build something new. From a cost perspective and functionality perspective, with maybe the exception of Hawkstone. And as I said previously, there isn't a legislative requirement to do that now, although we do have a responsibility to have accessible facilities.
Councillor Hutchison.
Thank you, through you, Mayor Greenlaw, and just more of a comment than a question in that, thank you, Mr. Binns, you spoke about Carly Hall and perhaps the heritage significance of that building. And anybody who reviews our potential designation of heritage property site on the website will see that all the halls are currently on there for consideration for designation. But through discussion with the Heritage Committee over the last few meetings, we have narrowed those buildings down to Carley Hall being a potential for designation where the others would not. And a lot of that doesn't have to do necessarily with the issue that we have in front of us, but it's because of the significant changes to the exteriors of the majority of those buildings. So I just wanted to put that out there in case someone was watching or in the audience here today thinking, why don't we just designate these buildings and carry on? There's been a lot of thought and discussion about that, and that's what it looks like currently.
Thank you. Councillor Bard?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you to, I guess, Sean or Roz. We're talking a lot about what might happen in the future. I just want to clarify a few things. So at this point, the halls don't need very much capital investments in them, correct? Correct. And we don't have to do anything about accessibility improvements at this point, so there isn't a lot of cost. And that these halls have been struggling coming out of COVID, and they're just starting to get their feet underneath them. They have new board members, and we're moving to a model in which the costs are fairly low, and we're going to have these specific business plans in place and giving the halls a chance to get those community uses up. That's what we're discussing?
That is correct.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions, comments? Madam Clerk, could you read the motion, please?
Moved by Hutchison, seconded by Clark. Be it resolved that OCS 2023-20, Roz Llewellyn, Manager, Community Services, Community Halls, future direction be received and adopted. That the community halls be required to submit annual business plans to be developed in 2024 for implementation as part of the 2025-2026 budget deliberations. That the Community Hall Board's funding policy be amended to reflect the current practice for the division of operating costs and requirement for annual business plans, and that capital expenditures continue to be addressed through the partnerships with the hall boards, with contributions to be determined through the annual budget process. That the prior direction to pursue a lease with Edgar Hall Board be withdrawn, and the Edgar Hall Board continue to operate the same as the other township community halls. That effective immediately, the community halls be no longer permitted as designated properties for special occasion permits / liquor licensed events, and that the township's municipal alcohol policy be amended accordingly. That the rental agreement with Brookstone Academy be terminated at the end of this school year, June 2024, to facilitate full community access, and that Brookstone Academy be advised accordingly.
Okay. So understanding what the clerk has read, does anyone have any questions or comments regarding that? So here's what I hear is we are passing a bylaw that will come at a later date to rewrite in the policies of the community halls that under no conditions can a liquor license be permitted.
Through you, Mayor Greenlaw, the intent is that we would discontinue that practice effective immediately as the resolution has been written, and the policy amendment would come before council at a later date.
Okay, so that component would be engaged at a later date. Because my question is, if somebody comes I'm asking, like, this is hypothetical, but if somebody comes to you and says, well, we'll pay for a staff member to be on site during the rental of the hall, is that an option, or we want to just say no and make it clean and concise?
We would want to say no and make it clean and concise. I mean, we would direct them to the Oro-Medonte community arena as we have been in the past, and that has served the need, or to point them to the private sector where those facilities are are provided. I think that the challenge for us is that when people are booking facilities, they're often 2 weeks out or 3 weeks out, and we've or even longer in some cases if they're looking at a wedding or an event like that. So that's kind of why the effective immediately piece came in, so that we do have a few events. I think most of the licensed events now are concluded, which is why we've made that recommendation. So we will be back before you in short order with an updated policy.
Thank you for providing that clarity. I just wanted that to be clear to everybody. Councillor Shell.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Greenlaw. Through you to Sean, would that include halls that are on a contract basis with you, like they're leasing? Or would that be written in the lease if they wanted to get their own permit?
Well, currently there are no halls on leases, and the only one that was even slightly interested, from my understanding, was the Hawkstone Hall, who is running at full steam now, which is great. So no one has shown interest, however, I've committed. If you did sign a lease and you're leasing the hall, then you would fall under a different set of regulations. You wouldn't be obliged to, as if you're a community hall and you're acting as a board.
Yes, thank you. That's what I was looking for. Okay, thank you.
Okay, perfect. So the motion on the floor is as read, and so I'll call the vote now. All in favor? That is passed. You're supposed to wait until I say all in favor before you put the cards up. I thought maybe I'm just slow. Yeah. So we do have another presentation at 3 o'clock. So I'm going to request that we take a 5-minute recess, Madam Clerk, and then we'll come back in chamber at 5 after, and that'll give Inspector Yateman a chance to get set up if he has anything to do in that regards. Okay? Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, we're live.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. We're at item 8 on the agenda, so we'll do deputations, and we now have a presentation from Inspector Yateman. If you'd like to come forward when you're ready.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Okay. So I'm reporting on the third quarter, which is July, August, and September of 2023. During that quarter, there were 12 sexual assaults that were reported. 3 are cleared by charge, 1 insufficient evidence to proceed, 4 that are open and still under investigation, and 4 where the victim or complainant declined to proceed. There were 26 assault occurrences during that time frame. 17 were cleared by charge, 2 departmental discretion, 3 where the victim declines to proceed, 3 where there insufficient evidence, and 1 that is still open. During that time, there were 5 stranger assaults and 1 assault police officer that's part of those 26. There were 66 domestic related occurrences. 28 of those were had criminal charges laid. There was 1 abduction occurrence during this quarter. It was a forcible confinement situation where a charge was laid. There were 12 other crimes against persons, which are typically harassments or threats. And out of those 12 occurrences, 2 were cleared by charge, 6 have insufficient evidence, 2 where the victim declines to proceed, and 2 that are still open and under investigation. There were 13 break and enters. 1 was cleared by charge, 1's open and under investigation, and 11 have insufficient evidence to proceed. 13, out of those 13, 6 were residential break and enters, and 7 were business locations. Theft over, there was 8 theft over occurrences during the time frame, 4 insufficient evidence to proceed, and 4 were open and under investigation. There were 20 theft under occurrences. Out of those 20, 8 were from motor vehicles, 1 was a shoplift, 11 of the others were theft unders, being smaller pieces of property. There were 4 occurrences that were cleared by charge of fraud occurrences or having stolen goods. And in the fraud category, we had 21 occurrences, 11 were insufficient evidence to proceed, 10 were open. We're still seeing the money transfer scams, the internet frauds, the credit card frauds. There was another selling online fraud as well. Out of the mischiefs, there were 11 mischiefs, 10 were insufficient evidence to proceed, and 1 is still open and under investigation. With respect to drug possession, we had 2 drug possession occurrences. Both were cleared by charge, and 1 drug trafficking occurrence that was cleared by charge as well. To go over provincial offense notices, there were 367 provincial offense notices issued during this quarter. We had 12 impaired occurrences, 7 of which were on a highway. The positives out of this is the public are calling. We did have a result of traffic complaints or people reporting possible impaired drivers during that. So very positive, the public's taking a part to stop that behavior. We did have 2 fatal motor vehicle collisions during that time frame. Both were on Highway 11. 1 involved a motorcycle and 1 involved a motor vehicle versus a pedestrian. We conducted 4 focus patrols in that time frame, 66 hours of focus patrol, which was 59 focus patrols, 62 provincial offense notices, and 11 warnings were issued. And we had 16 hours of foot patrol and 26 ride occurrences in that quarter. And that concludes my report, pending any questions.
Thank you very much, Inspector Yateman. Any questions from members of council regarding the report? Councillor Young?
Thank you, Mayor. Inspector Yateman, it indicates 12 additional sexual assaults were committed, 300% increase. I mean, it's concerning, and it's concerning to us all. What do you attribute that to?
Well, there was 7 occurrences that occurred at a music festival.
Yeah, thank you. And these are the reported sexual assaults, correct?
Those are the reported ones, correct?
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions or comments at this time? Councillor Deputy Mayor Lavoie.
Thank you very much. I presume that yourself, or at least Mr. Binns, will comment on the segregation of the statistics arising from the Boots and Hearts event versus the community at large.
Yeah, yes.
Correct.
As soon as I'm done this presentation, I'm actually going to call upon my colleague Lisa Rotar from the Municipal Policing Bureau. You've met her before.
Right.
We have a short presentation to go over the billing as well, but also the impact Boots and Hearts had.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll reserve questions till then.
Okay, thank you. No other questions at this time? Madam Clerk, is there a motion to receive?
There is, Mr. Mayor. Moved by Young, seconded by Shell. Be it resolved that the information presented by Inspector Coyer-Yateman, Detachment Commander, Aurelia Detachment, Ontario Provincial Police, OPP, Quarter 3, July, August, September 2023 statistics update be received.
Thank you. All in favor? That is passed. Thank you very much, Mr. Yateman. And now, do we want to just shift? How do we want to do this, Mr. Binns? Do you want to have the OPP give their presentation first, and then we'll shift into item 11A?
Yes, Mayor Greenlaw, I think that would provide enough context as it relates to some of the understanding of the provincial billing model for policing costs that we do identify in the report. So I think that'd be a good segue in between myself, Inspector Yateman, and Sergeant Rotar. We can answer any questions that come from the 3 that are interconnected.
Okay. Okay, so please, Sergeant, when you're ready, please proceed at your convenience.
Thank you. So good afternoon, Your Worship, members of Council. It's a pleasure to be here. Again, I am Sergeant Lisa Rotar, and I'm happy to have with me today Inspector Coyer-Yateman. Go ahead, next slide. So this is an overview of what I'll speak about. The 2024 annual billing statement, specifically page 1 for Oro-Medonte. 2024 calls for service billing summary, specifically page 5 of your billing statement. And the 2023 Boots and Hearts event calls for service cost estimate. So as a quick summary, the OPP provides policing services according to our mandate, both at the municipal level for 330 municipalities and the provincial level to over 14 million people across the province. We track our services by using the Daily Activity Reporting System, or the DAR system, which ensures municipalities don't pay for provincial response resources or obligations. This is the 2024 estimated cost recovery under the OPP billing model, and it shows the breakdown for how $428 million will be recovered from municipalities. So we're going to look specifically at the calls for service cost recovery as related to the Boots and Hearts event that took place this year. Okay, go ahead. So to start with, I want to share your 2024 annual billing statement where you can see the breakdown for the costing of base services, calls for services, and other costs. The orange box is your base service cost, which is a per property cost shared across the province. So for Oro-Medonte per property, it was $165.59. The blue box is your calls for service cost, and this is allocated based on your usage. So your calls for service percentage of the provincial total of $183,003,471 is 0.5426%, which comes to $993,053. Other costs are billed according to the municipal specific usage. So again, you have an estimate, overtime estimate being $94,557, prisoner transportation, $11,411, accommodation and cleaning services being $49,921, for a total 2024 estimated cost of $2,835,937. I will also bring attention to the purple box, which is your 2022 year-end adjustment. So again, this accounts for the difference between the amount billed and based on the estimate cost, and Oro-Medonte will be credited back $17,372. Okay. So this is going to tie into our following next slides, just to give us an understanding again. This is your 2024 calls for service billing summary for Oro-Medonte Township. So all billable calls for services are classified into those 9 separate billing working groups, and each working group has a separate average time standard, which is calculated annually, as you see. So the calls for service count uses the 4-year average of reconciled calls for services, which is multiplied by the current average time standard to investigate the call within each of these service billing work groups. And once it's calculated, the percentage of the total weighted time for your calls for service is allocated from the $183 million provincial total calculation. So as I mentioned before, your proportionate share of the $183 million total was $993,053. And you see that at the bottom. On page 7 of your annual statement, you can view all billable calls for service that occurred between 2019 to 2022. So this is important to understand because of how the billing model works. A cost estimate cannot be provided in the same year of an event, and there are additional costs such as your base service, overtime, court security, and prisoner transportation that are incorporated into the billing model to provide an annual billing estimate. So go ahead to the next slide. So on our website, opp.ca, there's a calls for service cost estimator tool. So we were provided with a 2023 Boots and Hearts calls for services by Inspector Yateman, and we applied this data to our 2024 calls for service billing model estimate calculations. As you'll see, this estimate is based on your specific event calls for service data, and it does not project the future cost. As mentioned, the estimate does not indicate the total policing costs recovered. Oro-Medonte is subject to cost recovery methodology detailed in the Police Service Act and subject to additional costs, as I previously mentioned, being base services, overtime, court security, and prisoner transportation. So based on the 2024 calls for service cost estimator tool, the billable calls for service total is estimated to be $78,722 for this event this year. The next slide will show you a comparison of your current calls for service summary. So go ahead to the next slide. So again, as I mentioned, it's important to note the Boots and Hearts calls for service will be incorporated into your 2025 annual billing statement. The 2023 event calls for service will be captured under the 2023 calls for service count in the 2025 annual billing statement. The 2025 average time standard will be applied to the 4-year average, which includes data from 2020, 2021, 2022, and 2023. All billable calls for service that occurred are listed under one of the 9 assigned calls for service billing work groups, which starts on page 7 of your annual billing statement. So as an organization, we will not be separating or highlighting those calls specific to one event. It gets captured in your total calls for service for that year. It gets incorporated to the 4-year average of calls and applied to the billing model, where we calculate your total weighted time, and then you pay your percentage of that from the total provincial amount. So again, as an estimate, we were able to provide that amount of $78,722. And you'll see all the calls that were captured were shown under the appropriate service billing work group. So as you see under drugs, there were 2 calls for service. Operational, there were 24 calls for service, and so on. Okay, And that's just to give you an idea again of how we're able to come up with this number and provide that for you today. Now, I don't know if you want to ask any specific questions about this, or if you want to wait until you combined operational questions, but I'm happy to answer anything.
That's a good question. Council, do you have any questions at this point in order to ask? And then we will shift to Mr. Binns. Deputy Mayor Lavoie.
Yes, would it be possible somehow to capture the prisoner transport component?
No, not at this time, because again, the way our billing model works,
Right.
we cannot provide that until the following year on the 2025 annual billing statement. And again, it's captured as a total cost. We don't divide it by an event or a date. So for us to pull that amount to a specific time frame, for example, the weekend of August 10th to the 14th, 2023, we're not able to provide that specific data. It's captured as a whole because court could be ongoing throughout the year. So every time, if it's the person's incarcerated, they're transported back and forth, we don't associate that to one specific day or event as per the system.
Okay, could it just a
Supplemental?
Would prisoner transport be an event where someone was transported from Oro-Medonte to a jail? Or is this simply going back and forth between courts?
It's everything. So
okay.
I imagine there were, because it was a major event, certain operational measures were taken to anticipate the possibility of that, and that was incorporated.
Thank you very much.
Do you want to speak further to that?
The only thing I could add is there were 17 people that were transported from the grounds to the detachment that weekend. But again, it's not, there's more to it than just that transportation. If they were held for bail and remanded, they could have been also transported to Penetang the following day. So there's some moving parts there.
And at the end of the day, all the costs are combined and shared across the province as a per property fee, as you saw on page 1 of your bill. So for prisoner transportation fee, it was $1.12 per property, and that was shared across the province.
Okay. Thank you very much. Any other questions at this point in time? Seeing none. Sergeant, is it Rockhard?
Rotar. Rotar.
Okay, so my apologies. I
okay.
don't want to get it messed up. So thank you very much. So we'll shift over. Madam Clerk, do we need a motion for receiving this information first?
Moved by Bard, seconded by Lavoie. Be it resolved that the information presented by Sergeant Lisa Rotar, Aurelia Detachment, Ontario Provincial Police, OPP, re the 2023 Boots and Hearts Summary of Costs be received.
All in favor? That is passed. And thank you very much, Sergeant Rotar and Inspector Yateman. And then, Mr. Binns, would you like to proceed with your presentation?
Sure thing. Thank you, Mayor Greenlaw. What we've tried to outline in the report is a bit of the evolution of Burroughs Creek event grounds and the events that have been hosted there, as well as our special event bylaw and its evolution, as well as to provide a detailed review of some of the highlights and opportunities for improvement coming out of this year's 2023 Boots and Hearts events. And I'm not going to go through in a great level of detail. It is a fairly lengthy report, but I think I will highlight that Burroughs Creek Event Grounds has been an event grounds for over 50 years, and it has followed a pretty dynamic path, having been home to the Barrie Speedway, a number of music festivals, very large music festivals over the years prior to changing hands in 2014. Since 2014, the property has followed a land followed various planning processes to permit and clarify land use permissions that took nearly 6 years to work through. So the special event bylaw and how we've worked through events with that property has followed a dynamic path along with some of the considerations associated with the respective land use. That was concluded in January of 2020. The property is now appropriately zoned to host events to a maximum of 100 number of days in a calendar year, with each use not exceeding 5 consecutive days. Part of that evolution also saw a change in the tax assessment classification of the property, evolving from lower agricultural and residential classifications into now being almost 80% assessed as commercial. So the township special event bylaw was put into place in 2014, and at that point in time, there was a number of really large events taking place all across the municipality. It was kind of the onset of the mud races. We were the first municipality to host Tough Mudder. We had a Spartan race, Warrior Dash. All of those events brought close to 30,000, in some cases more than 30,000 people into the municipality. And we've got a number of large kind of tourism businesses that we're looking to diversify their offering. All of those events bring different risks and considerations, so there was a need to put a framework into play, and we worked with our stakeholders, all of our agency partners, including the OPP and our business community, to put together a pretty robust framework in managing special events. And really the intent is to ensure that we have a collaborative model of planning and control with the event promoter, the host venue, and all of the agencies, and making sure that promoters understood the regulatory environment. We were having operators coming from overseas that weren't aware of some of the regulations as it relates to operating in the province of Ontario, let alone some of the local considerations. And we were also running into conflicts between events, that if we didn't know what was going on, there could be 2 major events being planned at two venues across the township. So a lot of work went into developing that framework. And that evolved with some of the events taking place bigger events taking place at Burroughs Creek to require a licensing component. And I do want to point out that the intent of the special events bylaw is to regulate and ensure that the risks to the community as a result of the event are appropriately managed. And that's really kind of what the township's role is from the licensing perspective. There are requirements for sign-off from all of the appropriate agencies, as you're aware, for a condition of licensing. That's to ensure that there's an appropriate level of due diligence with event promoters to ensure that that the risks are appropriately managed. But in doing that and granting a license, we're not assuming responsibility or control over any of the aspects of the operation. It's to really delineate our role to ensure appropriate due diligence, and the agencies that do have jurisdiction over things like public safety, liquor licensing, et cetera, have reviewed the plans, and that the venue and operator have done their due diligence to ensure that the risks are appropriately managed. So it is an important, I think, distinction in terms of what the municipal role is in terms of licensing, and certainly not to get into the operation or execution of the event and those considerations which rest with either the venue or the promoter. the one interesting thing about special events is that they are all special and completely different, and we really struggled with that in terms of looking at the number of participants, and just because there's more people doesn't necessarily mean it's a higher risk event. As you can appreciate, things like obstacle courses and those types of races do carry a much different risk portfolio than a community wedding, which could be deemed as a special event as well. So that's a bit of an overview just in terms of the evolution of the bylaw. And I do think it's been extremely successful. We have held some world-class events here, and we've held some world-class events at Burroughs Creek as well. And there's always opportunities to evolve, and that'll be a bit of a theme throughout the report in terms of that evolution. And I think looking at some of the things that worked well and continuing to build on those, and opportunities for improvement. And you'll also see there is a link to our recently updated special events manual, and it's a pretty comprehensive guide for promoters on what to think about, what best practices, and what the local regulations are. So we have highlighted some of the successes from this year's Boots and Hearts event. Some really big names from a country music perspective. Continued strong attendance. We have included some stats that we've received from Burroughs Creek in terms of some of the local impacts with local jobs and trades that are involved in the production and lead in and post event aspects. Another kind of major component, I think, which is a testament to the team and our partners in emergency services, that for the past number of years we've had a number of weather threats, and there was an evacuation that did take place, and that happened really smoothly with a lot of the work of our emergency partners in preparation this year in the team at Burroughs Creek. Traffic is always a major consideration. There is an improved traffic plan that was part of the planning process that was created by Creighton Manning in 2015. Have been a number of changes over the past number of years, largely to deal with things like Uber and ride sharing that we're seeing more and more of, that really wasn't a thing 9 years ago, but is now. And there were some changes to the plan this year to try and accommodate that. And there was some changes to the event itself. It was cut short by a day with a Thursday start as opposed to the Wednesday start. So there were some issues for sure with traffic throughout the weekend at the kind of the peak points of access and egress, and then associated with day use. And that's really the result of a culmination of factors. The Wednesday load in, as I mentioned, there was some environmental factors with rain and the grounds, slower getting vehicles in, number of accidents, and some changes that were made outside of the plan as it relates to dealing with just, I think, the excess demand for some of the single day tickets associated with the Friday evening, and that created some issues with pedestrian traffic as well. So all that said, I think it's looking at, what do we do and how do we mitigate those things moving forward. So Burroughs Creek has already engaged their traffic engineer to update that 2015 plan, and it'll be a kind of a comprehensive review of updating that traffic plan for both the single day events as well as multi-day events, looking at their in-grounds infrastructure and traffic flow, traffic control requirements, and any additional infrastructure requirements that may be there, things like new entrances or widening or revisions to existing roads or pedestrian routes. Inspector Yateman and his team are reviewing resource requirements for 2024. As I mentioned, Burrows Creek is reviewing opportunities in grounds, and then looking to reinstate the Wednesday load-in to reduce the flow of vehicles, and that has been successful in prior years. We do have perimeters that are put in place as it relates to sound. Those have worked well. A very limited number of complaints from the community, as you can see from the attachments. There were no issues with compliance. We did want to highlight that the sound limits were and have been effective as it relates to managing sound for this specific genre of music. But if there is, things that or electronic music or music that has really heavy bass, it would have a much bigger impact on the community, and we need to look at what those parameters would be, because the existing sound limits wouldn't work to manage that well. So we just kind of wanted to highlight that aspect. Medical, the medical team employed by Republic Live and Boots and Hearts has done a great job of managing medical with the aim of treating people on site and minimizing the impacts on our local hospitals. So we have highlighted some of the statistics that were reported by County of Simcoe Paramedic Services, and the Chief of Paramedic Services has reported no notable impacts to levels of service in 2023. So that's certainly a good news story. But not surprisingly, we're seeing increases in the prevalence of mental health and some of the issues that are associated with that. Not only at this event, but we're seeing that across society now. We did want to highlight that trend, and certainly our community health partners are looking at provisions to help better support that, not only at the event, but throughout the community. And again, I mentioned emergency management and continued kind of focus on emergency management planning, that severe weather, those types of things are an ongoing concern for all of our emergency service agencies. Excuse me. Our Fire and Emergency Service Department is employed by Burrows Creek under contract for service contract for the weekend to have staff on site. There were no issues reported from our fire chief, and they worked diligently in both prevention and responding to minor calls on site. We have included the role of the health unit and some of the things they did. There were no notable concerns from a public health perspective. Our development services team are involved in the issuance of building permits, as our municipal law enforcement team looks at food vending along with the health unit. So there were no notable issues associated with that. Food and beverage plans, again, are reviewed by various agencies. The health unit looks at water and food. And then the AGCO deals with the licensed areas, and there were some opportunities, as there always is, with some internal processes, just improving the overall functions of those licensed areas and security in those areas. Community impact, traffic was the big one. I'm sure members of council received numerous emails. As I mentioned, we had very few complaints as it related to sound. Emergency management, I've highlighted, and police and security. You've heard a little bit from Inspector Yateman and Sergeant Rotar about some of the implications. And You can see on page 11 of the report, we have highlighted the number of paid duties, a shift in 2023 to have incident commanders involved in the execution of the event. And there is a cost associated with that component. The overtime associated with that falls into the 4-year cycle Sergeant Rotar was speaking to. And then you'll see a summary of the call for service aggregation of the weekend, as well as 2022 and 2019 and 2020 and 2021 are not are shown in the chart there, as they were canceled due to the pandemic. And I think Inspector Yateman spoke about the 6 prisoner transports. So measures to be taken in 2024 as it relates to policing and security. The Burroughs Creek team are looking at their security deployment and opportunities to enhance security to deal with some of the aspects on site. And the OPP are reviewing their resource requirements for paid duty to address the increase in calls for services and opportunities to minimize the overtime associated with the investigations. So as it relates to the financial component, we have tried to highlight some of the costs associated with the event, as well as some of the benefits. There are a number of staff that are involved in planning. I would say that the amount of time that staff spend on this now is pretty limited compared to what it used to be in the past, given kind of the maturity of this event. We have tried to quantify that for you, just to put a rough number in terms of the cost of those hours. And I would say that it's not a true cost, in the sense that it's not a cost of lost productivity. There is potentially some element of that, but a lot of the work happens outside of the standard hours, and there's no kind of direct compensation associated with that. The OPP and civilian overtime costs are a concern, and they are fairly significant costs. The costs associated with the overtime with the event is just over $25,000, which represents about 535 hours. And just to put that into context, looking at that historical OPP billing cycle, our typical average annual overtime is 105,000. So it's a fairly big chunk if you look at that one event over kind of the 4-year average. And then the cumulative costs associated with the increase in calls for service. And what we did is we highlighted the average cost per call for service to come up with that number of just under 70,000. But as Sergeant Rotar pointed out, they broke the calls out into the respective weighted classifications. So that number is, using that methodology, is a little bit higher at 78,000. There are, I think, as everybody knows, a number of significant events or significant benefits associated with large-scale special events and special events in general. There was an economic impact study that was done as part of the zoning process that we've included on page 13, and you can see the benefits across the province as it relates to total spend for the Boots and Hearts event, as well as the Way Home event that historically happened on the grounds. And I spoke previously about some of the benefits with local benefits of our local contractors and job creation as well. I won't go through all of those in detail. Just a couple other points I think that are worthy for discussion. The bylaw is intended to be consistently applied across the municipality, and this is certainly a challenge that I think we've all grappled with, is trying to determine what a base level of service would be as it relates to Burles Creek, for example, or Horseshoe Resort. And I'll use the Mount St. Louis Resort, or any other business that has a different profile in the municipality. And I'll give you an example of a medical facility that if you were to take a ski facility, there'd be a significant number of medical transports on any given weekend over the winter. But those ski resorts aren't having EMS, full EMS on site at their cost. They're absorbed through county taxpayers and part of the base level of service. That's not necessarily applied as it relates to Burles Creek. So there is, those considerations that I think all of the agencies struggle with in terms of, an equitable application across not only the township, but across the county and across the provinces, as those resources are deployed and paid for by various layers of taxpayers. We have highlighted some consideration around administration fees for special events. We haven't done that in the past, although we do have a number of provisions that we put in place through the licensing process for cost recovery if there's a need to do that. We have highlighted there are a few agents or different municipalities that charge different fees, and just one off a quick review is the town of Blue Mountains charges about $1,100 for a regional event and $535 for a community event. I think we've always looked at that in terms of the benefit, and it's not a big amount. There's a small number of events. It wouldn't really be significant. The recovery of costs are a bigger issue. So kind of understanding the implications of the police costs and the way it relates to the billing model, and there are some complexities with the billing model as well as it relates to paid duty in this application for an event of this size and scale, that some of those calls for service are responded to and dealt with a paid duty. So there may not be a future cost implication associated with that, but that's the way the model is built. So understanding those components, we do have a memorandum of understanding that does provide for cost recovery with Burles Creek, and similar to any other event that would have a similar profile. The challenge is how do we reconcile, and what's the baseline? Where's the starting point? And some of the other aspects, just in terms of the billing model itself, and some of the limitations that are there based on the ability to report these statistics on a long-term basis. It has been a challenge with the OPP in the past to get the level of detail that we need to do that, and certainly thanks goes out to Inspector Yateman and his team for helping us pull this together and give council a level of understanding here. But really, the recommendations are around negotiating and working through an equitable resolution with Burles Creek for 2023, and then developing a policy framework for implementation in 2024, not only for application at Burles Creek, but for application with other large special events happening across the municipality, so that it is equitable. I think I'd be remiss if I didn't say that Burles Creek has been really cooperative and collaborative with the township and all of our agency partners in planning and going through this model of evolution. And going through what worked well and continuing to invest in those things and putting resources into the things that they require from a lessons learned, and certainly they've been part of this process as well. And lastly, just to highlight key performance indicators and continuous improvement, I think the whole model has been built on that the sign-offs from those agencies are really there to do that. Especially for recurring events, it may be a little bit harder for new events if there's no history and there's nothing to measure against. But there are requirements for traffic plans, and how those traffic plans work is the indicator. I mentioned medical and the impacts on hospital and transport. That's kind of our measurement in terms of impact on the community, no different than fire, sound. We've really kind of highlighted those aspects for you in the report. But I think from a governance perspective, your assurance is the sign off from all of those agencies that are responsible for those various areas, signing off on the event permit and doing the work that they do with the event promoter in reviewing and debriefing and making sure that they have a level of comfort with those plans moving forward prior to us coming before you with a request for a license or a permit in a future year. So that's really an overview, the evolution of the grounds, the report. And this year, there are plans in place to address traffic, and those measures are already underway. We do need to work through how we deal with the fairly significant increase in calls for service and how we deal with that moving forward.
Thank you very much for, sorry, lost you there. Thank you very much for the report. Is there any questions or comments from members of council at this point? I think the main point is we've identified some concerns from last year's events, and I applaud because all the agencies and partners in implementing and organizing and the operations of the event are talking, and they've already started working on solutions for next year, which is the way we want to move on all of our events and activities within the township. So I'm getting to you in 1 second. So I think, great report. And I'm glad to see that, we can work with all the operators, the OPP, and the township staff to find solutions to the concerns. And I'm very optimistic we'll get to a better place before next summer. So, Deputy Mayor Lavoie.
Yes, thank you very much. I'd like to thank everybody who participated in generating this report. I realize it was quite a large report. It was probably an undertaking well worth doing, however, as well. While I am quite pleased with the report, I'd also say there are a few issues that I do have, that remain, and I guess the time will tell with each event. So I have a number of concerns, which I will not enumerate here, but I'll pass on to staff to contemplate as they move through the process henceforth to the time at which the permit is issued for 2024. I also have some management system recommendations. I have a reasonable amount of experience in management systems, I'll put it that way, and I think there's probably a lack of certain management system elements in terms of what we might regard today as Six Sigma or continuous improvement, and I'd like to see some of those things implemented so that at the next event we can compare it to what happened this year and indeed be able to identify that there has been an improvement. There are marked changes in the calls for service and violent crime matters. I think those need to be addressed at large, and so those will be my comments, and I'll pass them on to you outside of this meeting for consideration in your future actions. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Lavoie. Any other comments at this time? Councillor Young?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Just a couple of questions for you, Sean. One of them is, could we get find out the actual number of attendees or the gate that occurs at Burroughs Creek? We're always getting this number of 30 to 40,000 people, and personally, I'd like to know exactly how many people show up there, and I think the police would like to know that too, exactly how many. I know that's being addressed in terms of number of campers for another matter there, in terms of the mat tax, but is it possible to get an accurate number of the actual number of people that attend an event over there?
Through you, Mayor Greenlaw, the operations plans do contain numbers. They're not our numbers to provide. Certainly, Inspector Yateman and his team, and through the operational component, if there are concerns, we will try to get those numbers from the promoter, but they're not our numbers to report on. I would also question, I think from a governance perspective, I come back to the special event bylaw, the control mechanisms that are in place, and the role of all of those agencies to review their components. So, I mean, we could request, I just don't know if we can get them and provide them, and if we're providing them, what purpose is it for? I think we would need to understand that to be able to request that of the promoter, because I think they'd want to understand what they would be used for.
Well, just to get a better understanding of what is going on over there. But just a second point, I have difficulty with the township bearing any additional costs for the events at Burroughs Creek, in particular the policing costs. In my view, is they should be downloaded onto Burroughs Creek, being as they're the cause of the additional police intervention or costs. And but I see that's being addressed in your report in terms of negotiating a recovery for the cost of the additional policing and several different parts of the report there. So that's my sense, that I don't think that the township should bear any additional cost for additional policing as a result of the events at Burroughs Creek.
Yeah, no, that's a good, I understand your comment. I think at the same time, it's how we put policies in place to encompass a capacity component, and they're working towards a solution to get to a better spot. I think that's all good. It's like, whether it's one of the ski hills and stuff that have, how many people do they have on the hill per day, and how many responses that get encompassed in. Fortunately, because paramedics go through the county system, it's a different model. But I think the main message is, I appreciate all the parties that have come in today to give the update and show how they're working together to put us in a better place for events moving forward. Any other comments? Councillor Young?
Yeah, thank you. Just one additional comment. I'm glad to see that those with mental illness or mental disabilities, whether temporary or permanent, are being addressed there. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Madam Clerk, could we have the motion, please?
Moved by Lavoie, seconded by Hutchison. Be it resolved that OCS 2023-21, Sean Binns, Director of Operations and Community Services, RE 2023 Boots and Hearts Review be received and adopted. That staff negotiate a cost recovery reconciliation for the 2023 Boots and Hearts Township policing cost impacts with Burroughs Creek. It is further recommended that a model for consistent policy application be developed with the assistance of the OPP for the cost recovery directly associated associated with special events across the township for council's consideration prior to 2024 events.
Thank you very much. Any comments or questions regarding the motion itself? Seeing none, I'll call the vote. All in favor? And that is passed. So item 12, reports of municipal officers. There are none. Reports of members of council. Are there any updates from members of council regarding the representatives with our partners or agencies? Oh, sorry. Councillor Hutchison.
Through you, Mayor Greenlaw. Not sure, Councillor Schell, if you had a report from the Heritage Committee, or would you like me to speak to it?
I would like you to do that for us, please.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. Heritage Committee met on Monday, and I'm really pleased to say the meetings are getting more efficient. In other words, not taking as long as they have in the past, and that's because we're, as a committee, moving along very well on one of the major projects, which is the designation of heritage properties within Oro-Medonte. So that's coming along really well, and I have to give Catherine McCarroll a lot of credit for the work that she's doing behind the scenes to make this happen. And secondly, I believe that we will see coming before us at either the next meeting a request with regards to cemetery signage, which has been an ongoing project for a number of years for two very passionate members of the Heritage Community Committee, and it'll be really great to see this come forward and see, hopefully it will move forward, because it's been a passion project and something that's going to be very valuable to Oro-Medonte. So thank you. That's my report.
Thank you very much. Any others? I don't see any at this time, so we will move on to announcements. Is there any announcements? Councillor Bard?
Yes, just like to make the announcement, Mr. Mayor, through you, that the Mystical Lights is in the process, and people are installing many, many lights, and there's a new location. It's at Heidi's Campground. Pretty excited for the new location, and it starts on December the 1st, and you can check and buy tickets online.
Thank you very much. Councillor Young.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to announce again the town hall meeting at Mount St. Louis Ski Hills there. It's on November 29th. It commences at 6 p.m. And what's going to take place there is Mr. Binns is going to give an overview of what's planned for the Moonstone area in terms of recreation. And another member is going to give an overview of AED, which are defibrillators, and in terms of trying to get one into the Moonstone area at this time. So it's Mr. Deborah Van Nutter is her name, and any other questions that are posed to us in regards to the township itself or Ward 6 could be asked at that time, and we will address them.
Deputy Mayor Lavoie.
I just wanted to ask what time your November 29th.
Yeah, that's at 6 p.m. I thought I gave that time out today. Yeah. Well.
That's fine. Mr. Binns?
Good afternoon, Your Worship. I just would like to remind Council that next Friday night, December the 1st, it's the Mayor and Council skate. So for those individuals who are watching, just feel free to come out for a wonderful festive event, free event. So bring the family to come and skate with Council and Mayor. And there will probably be a very jolly gentleman also joining us that evening. So it's at 6 p.m. at the Oro-Medonte Community Arena.
Thank you very much, Ross. Councillor Hutchison.
Thank you. I just wanted to thank Councillor Schell and Councillor Lavoie for joining me in our team at the We Unite Soup Off that took place a week ago. I have to commend Tina Sauvé, Pool Sauvé, who puts this on for We Unite. It was beyond anything that I had expected. It was so much fun, a really lively night. I can't quote the number of gallons of soup that were made, but they are donated to the Redwood communities. And the event raised $12,500 for We Unite, so it was a huge success, and I look forward to participating again next year. And I would just also like to mention that I did have my town hall last night. I want to give a thanks to the staff who worked really hard to help me get prepared for that. Sean Binns was one of the speakers that night and really did a fantastic job. We had representatives from the OPP who were also very helpful in discussing traffic. And I just want to give a shout out to Mr. Thomas Klassen, who is a WR Best student who did the land acknowledgement, and he did a terrific job. It was a great night. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Young, it's a ping pong game back and forth between you two.
I just want to mention when I indicated the town hall meeting at Mount St. Louis there on the 29th at 6 p.m., that it's not only for the Moosehorn area, it includes Vasey area as well, the park up there, what is planned for that park in terms of recreation as well, so I don't want to leave them out at all. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, any other announcements at this time? I'm seeing none, so we will go to the consent agenda. Is there anything on the consent agenda that anyone wants pulled for separate discussion? Seeing none. Madam Clerk, may we have a motion for the consent agenda?
Moved by Bard, seconded by Lavoie. Be it resolved that the staff recommendations with respect to the items listed under consent agenda correspondence be adopted as printed.
All in favor? That is carried. We've done, let me flip the page, there are no notice of motions. There are no, under bylaw, closed sessions complete. Confirmation bylaw, may we have a confirmation bylaw motion, please?
Moved by Shall, seconded by Young. Be it resolved that bylaw number 2023-097, being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the council meeting held on Wednesday, November 22nd, 2023, be read a first, second, and third time, being engrossed by the clerk, signed and sealed by the mayor.
I'll call the vote. All in favor? That's carried, and may we have a motion to adjourn?
Moved by Lavoie, seconded by Bard. Be it resolved that we do now adjourn at 4:10 p.m.
All in favor? That is carried, and thank you very much, everybody. Have a great evening, and enjoy the rest of the week.